Welcome to all of you for this webinar on how SMEs can end forced labor. Today, we are running this webinar in partnership with Alliance 8.7. Of course, I'm sure most of you know Alliance 8.7 by now. We are the ILO Global Business Network on forced labor. We are a network that is looking towards a future without forced labor. And of course, we are delighted today to be hosting this particular webinar in partnership with Alliance 8.7. But more in particular, I'm very happy that we have representation on the panel, mainly from Alliance 8.7 Pathfinder countries. Today, you will be hearing from Costa Rica, Sri Lanka, and then, of course, my own country, Uganda. From Costa Rica, we are joined by Milena Grillo. She's the Director of Strategy and Innovation at Fundación Panamo. Of course, this is Age for Innovation, so we are very delighted to have you, Milena. And then also to join us is Shores Dimel, having difficulties at the moment, but hopefully will be able to join. He's the owner of an SME, the Lanka Fishing Flies, but also a board member of the Employers Federation of Ceylon and the chairman of the Sri Lanka Export Development Board, which keeps him quite busy, perhaps responsible for him not being with us at the moment. We will also have from Uganda a founder and managing director of Windrow Bees Company Limited. Hopefully we shall have some Annie along the way. So welcome and thank you for joining us today to see the commitment of the Pathfinder countries on this issue is really good for us. And of course, from my own country, that commitment also, as we have seen, and the SME today will speak to us, Robert representing them for this session. The ILO Global Business Network on forced labor works very closely with Alliance 8.7. We have been working on a number of issues, but more specifically in the area of advocacy, communications, and capacity building in the Pathfinder countries. This webinar is part of a wider campaign that is trying to unlock the potential of SMEs in the fight against forced labor. If you haven't already done so, we highly recommend that you listen to our new podcast series. With also, together with some short policy briefs that we have been developing as the Global Business Network on forced labor, specifically on these issues. As you already know, SMEs could be the catalyst when it comes to ending forced labor. This is because the labor market is actually dominated by them. The private sector is constituted by up to 90% SMEs. So SMEs definitely have an important role to play. Moreover, SMEs often also operate at local but also sub-national level, and therefore their impact could be felt a lot stronger in the various supply chains. You'll hear from the panelists whom we have today. The three have briefly introduced them, referring generally to what they're doing in terms of responsible business conduct, but also focusing specifically on the issue of forced labor. So it's always a good point to start from the wider context of responsible business conduct. Now, in terms of a few housekeeping rules for today, first, we have interpretation. You can just take advantage of your Zoom button for translation. We have translations available in French, English, and Spanish as well. So just take advantage of the small globe sign on your screen to change the language to your preferred option. In terms of the panel engagement, I'll be asking a couple of questions to our panelists for today. But on your part, we are very much interested in hearing from you as well. So take advantage of the Zoom function, the Q&As function, so that you can raise your questions, and we'll be happy to answer it when we reach the open session. So once again, welcome to all of you. It's such a pleasure. Now I would like us to start by hearing from my own country. Robert is the founder and managing director of Windrow Bees Company. Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us for today. Robert, can you just tell us a bit about your company? I know there's bees all over your company, but please tell us a little more, just in a few minutes. That's one of them.
All right. Windrow is dedicated to processing high-quality honey and beeswax, and we are working with a total of 3,900 outgrowers across the greater northern Uganda. And the company provides hands-on training to the said farmers for quality production of the raw materials. We are dedicated to building and expanding the honey value chain in Uganda and also conserving the environment. We will build a link from honey production sites, producers, and then to consumers, national market, and then export too. Our main products, we do honey in 2 brands, African Queen Honey and then Lango Premium. Both of them are certified with a permit from UNPS for international marketing. We also do beeswax. Actually, is our leading, largest business. We basically do it for export to Japan. They use it in pharmaceutical industries, cosmetic, and then candle making industries. We also do beekeeping kits, equipment. We make beehives, bee suits, smokers for farmers who are interested in production, all those guys who want to start up. So we also provide this kind of tool for them. So these tools build confidence with the beekeepers, but also encourage them to care for their own bees and produce quality honey. We also do support and training, technical training. Many donors and funds ask us to provide field apiculture support and training in the rural areas to increase the livelihood of the poor people. The training and the consultative program are always delivered by our training center. And then we offer quality honey, beekeeping management, and value addition and marketing. And finally, we do corporate social responsibility. We are working in poor and war-torn communities in northern Uganda. Therefore, we take our responsibility in diligently initiating and supporting orphans and vulnerable children, female empowerment, and then enhancing biodiversity conservation. Basically, this is what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Robert. I think you basically work in the entire value chain in the bee space. But just to set us rolling for today, I want to ask you just to tell us what it means. As an SME, why is responsible business conduct, including, of course, the eradication of child and forced labor, important to you, not only as a business, as your company, but also at a higher level, at sectoral level, and as well as country level. And of course, you could also tell us what are some of the challenges that you face.
Okay, thank you, Douglas. As a MSc in Uganda, and as a social entrepreneur The company and me as the founder, we have the heart to empower the community, to support the community. So some of the challenges that affects our engagement with the community, we try to avoid them. Like issues of child and then enforced labor. We definitely don't want to encourage that. And we want to work towards embracing the community, showing love and responsibility, and building our relationship with the community. But we noted there are a lot of challenges. As an SME in Uganda, with my experience, most people are willing at making money. They don't look at the process of the engagement with the communities, the raw material producers, and then at the other end, the employee and then the employers. So, but we noted a lot of challenges, and some of them we're already addressing them through working with ILO and then FIU in Uganda. One of the things we noted is most of the SMEs in Uganda, they're not willing to access labor information, labor documents from ILO and then FIU. So this brings a gap because they don't have information. They are not willing to get information, so they don't have this kind of documents. And then it brings a challenge when they're trying to engage with the community in terms of production or even the people they employ. So there's always a gap there that we noted. And then also failing to identify risk in operation, like company operation, and then also within the communities. And then you find workers at risk, okay? Because the SMEs, they don't have time to do due diligence, they don't do the risk they have with working with the communities. Then the other challenge is information. Most of them are not willing to get to the network like ILO, FIU. Probably they're fearing to pay membership fee, and then they're looking at also not observing some of these policies on labor employment because they don't have the information. So they eventually end up abusing the community they're working with, enforcing child labor and all this kind of stuff. So, but as WIMROC, we really seek for information. We have networks like ILO and then FIU that normally guides us. We do training, they do training for us, and then they guide our work. And then, like I said, most of the SMEs are very reluctant on accessing the policies, like on child labor and forced labor. And then see, information is a very big power. And if they don't have the information, they're not following the procedure, the protocol, the policies which is needed to implement some of these policies. And then human rights abuse as well. It's going up together because there are a lot of court cases here where, some people fail, employers are failed to pay their staff, and maybe somebody has worked for like 4 or 5 years, and then no payment. So these are some of the life experience we're trying to note. And then also there's a lack of responsibility, lack of accountability to foster responsibility. Like for us, we have some senior staff who are really engaged in trying to see if there's a problem with a staff. Okay, we have efforts to eliminate labor, enforced labor in our company. So, like a senior staff is responsible for finding out, to observe, to see what's happening, and then they see how they can address those kind of issues. So there's also lack of accountability to foster responsibility in the SMEs. And then that brings about reluctancies, and then the drive to change and the efforts to eliminate enforced labor is not there with some of the SMEs. And then child trafficking in the business supply chain, and most of them are engaging the children to do supply for them, to do raw material production, which in the actual sense is not allowed. Yeah. And then we have also noted that there's lack of champions in most of these SMEs, probably to educate the staffs, and then response to problems, and then tackle workers' issues and concerns. So there's also that gap. But like for us, we have appointed some champions. We have some mentors in our business that normally guide the staff, see if they have some challenges. Actually, we also have a suggestion box. So some of them who are fearing to come directly, they can write up, they put in the suggestion box, and then we handle that. And then there's also one thing I noted is the SMEs in Uganda is lack of skills to identify signs of forced labor and modern slavery. So, like I said, there are a lot of gap in the skills. So the information is not enough. So I think, like for us in WIMROP, we are already part of FEW and then ILO. So we get a lot of training, a lot of information, and this trying to guide us, to guide the company, to guide the employees, to guide the employer as well, so that we can avoid child labor and then enforced labor within our community. And then the other thing is seeking opportunities. Most of the SMEs, they're hesitant on seeking opportunities, like even having networks like FEW, ILO, they're very hesitant. So I see a gap there. But like for us, we're open-minded. We sign up with initiatives like ILO, FEW in Uganda here, and other groups that will give us information, skills, and all this. Then finally, the stakeholders and investors, probably now they should have a rigorous due diligence and management of human rights risk. They should encourage demonstrated good governance and effective management so that SMEs who are leading by example can be inspired or should be recognized and rewarded for best labor practices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, for your quite elaborate response. And I can see you're very much informed. You raise a lot of pertinent issues. Some of those are what we are trying to address. Within the Global Business Network on forced labor, membership is actually free for SMEs, just to cut the cost that you're talking about, the fear, membership fees and stuff like that. We are also trying to bring those voices at the global level. That's why the three of you have joined us today. So we are trying to work to address that. But now, having heard from you in terms of the challenges that we are facing, I would like us now to turn our attention to our next speaker from Costa Rica, Milena Grillo, Director of Strategy and Innovation. First, I just want to ask you to tell us a bit about yourself and your work. And then, of course, I would also like you to tell us a bit more about your work with SMEs in Costa Rica. Are you supporting them? Over to you, Milena. Thank you so much.
Microphone for Milena, please.
Milena, I see you're muted. Can you please unmute yourself? Thank you.
Ahora sí. Gracias.
Thank you. I thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the ILO and to the Global Network. For me, really, it's a privilege to be here to talk about the efforts and the challenges that we're making and that we have in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a beautiful country without an army that has 2 centuries now of history of democracy and invests a lot of its resources in health and education. However, due to errors in the development model of our country, this country that has, let's have, a context of a lot of inequality. In fact, Latin America on the whole is one of the most unequal continents on the world, and Costa Rica is one of the most unequal countries in Latin America, and this inequality means that in our country, boys, girls and adolescents have there are children that has access to services like in developed countries, and there are other children who live in poverty with their families. And so these inequalities, as you're aware, are the primary causes of forced labour, commercial sexual exploitation and the trafficking of boys, girls and adolescents. I work at the Paniamor Foundation, which is a civil society organisation that has more than 30 years of history now, and all of our work is focused on everything to do with prevention and responding to violence that children and young people face in our country, in addition to tackling the inequalities that they face. And so everything to do with child labour, forced labour and other forms of child and adolescent labour, and everything to do with sexual exploitation and the trafficking of boys, girls and adolescents. These are all things that we deal with. When the global movement against sexual exploitation began in Stockholm at the end of the 90s, actually, I think, we thought about this in Costa Rica because it turned out that Costa Rica was a country affected by sexual exploitation. Tourism, well, this has changed with the pandemic, of course, but tourism before was the main source of income for our country. It was a very significant source of development because we'd receive huge amounts of tourists every year for such a small country. And so a practice of tourism had set in. Tourists, rather than travellers, would come to our country and exploit our children sometimes. And so we have engaged in some really intense work. Over 2 decades, 20 years, we've been working on this. This is very intense work. And so we've been trying to expose the challenge that we face in our country and tackling this type of tourism, but we can't do this if we don't benefit from the support of large, medium-sized and small countries, from the private sector. We can't do it as a state unless these companies are on board. So we initiated a marvellous process involving the tourism industry to protect boys, girls and adolescents against forced labour. And this mechanism, if you like, is a mechanism that was proposed by the World Tourism Organization and other multilateral organizations, and we started to use this to bring together tourism countries at all different levels and get them to help us to develop a network, if you like, to protect children against these types of situations. Today we have 435 countries that are part of this movement. They're large, but also there are small and medium-sized ones. Actually, they're the majority. And we've managed to engage in awareness raising that's helping us to drive forward our work. And so over the first decade, the first 10 years, this work was exclusively with companies, and then during the second decade, the Costa Rican state got on board with the Ministry of Tourism. And you can see here on the screen how we've worked over the last 2 decades to create this alliance with companies, and companies have started to really respond to this work. It's really marvellous work. And there's a raft of different elements that I'd like to go into further detail on afterwards that helped us to develop a public-private partnership. And perhaps after someone asked a question, I could talk a bit more about this, but The first learning curve for us was this partnership with small and medium-sized countries and how to actually work together with them to protect children. This is something, of course, that takes time. It needs to be built, it's a process, and for us this was a really lovely experience, and I'm very grateful for the Ministry of Labour and the Ministry of Tourism in our country and for the ILO for giving me this experience to share our work with you. And we've now become an example, a good practice of a multi-sectoral activity to protect children from forced labour and sexual exploitation. So I'll leave it there, because afterwards I'm going to go into further detail on what we've learnt from this dialogue and this joint work with the SME sector, which of course are the areas where boys, girls and adolescents are at the highest risk.
Thank you so much, Milena. That was quite insightful. And also, I'm amazed at your vast experience working over already 2 decades with SMEs. That's quite an achievement in itself, to be in that space for that long, changing lives. But just to ask you a follow-up question to what you have just presented. I see you put a slide with extensive reflection of stakeholder engagement and how you approach that. So I just want to know, how important has it been for you to engage all these different stakeholders to be able to achieve what you have been able to achieve over the past 2 decades? Basically, how did you go about engaging everyone? It's such a huge matrix, if I'm to call it, of stakeholders whom you were able to engage. Thank you.
Sí, gracias. Bueno, lo primero es que la iniciativa.
Yes, thank you. Well, the first thing is that from the beginning, the initiative was to actually make this a country initiative across our whole country. So for Costa Rica to protect boys, girls and adolescents, so it's the country working together. And from the very beginning, we worked with the tourism sector because we've engaged in work to convince them, to work with them, with small and medium companies in tourism, to convince them, first of all, that the problem exists in the country, and talk to them about how it affects the tourism industry, because it damages the activity of tourism. All of the sexual exploitation that we see in Costa Rica is damaging. And we've also worked on sustainability. We've made a commitment to sustainability, and this policy, well, in the Costa Rican state, is for Costa Rican tourism to be sustainable. And so we've worked with companies in the tourism sector, because actually no country can claim to have sustainable tourism if forced labour and sexual exploitation exists and is associated with tourism. You can't aspire to that if that happens. And so, first of all, we asked a question. In fact, we asked ourselves what we thought about the problem. We asked them what they thought about the problem, what they knew about it, and what concerns they had. And we asked them about how damaging they thought it was for the economic development of our country. And we reached an agreement on the fact that tourism was key. This took time, though. We had dialogue on this. And once we reached this agreement, we asked, well, if you can help us, and if you can get on board and help to provide this protection, and if you would be prepared to do that, what do you need to do it? And they said that they needed information. They often didn't know about how to go about it. We also engaged in processes in the areas of highest risk to protect boys, girls and adolescents, and engaged in a sustained process, and we actually explained exactly what forced labour was, what was the trafficking of children, what sexual exploitation is. They actually discovered after this that yes, in their businesses they did have these practices, they did exist, and so listening to them and engaging in dialogue with them on what the problems were and what we wanted to do and how important it was for their activities. And this was a real driving force that enabled us to make progress. Over the first 10 years, I'd like to say, we only worked with companies. In fact, the Costa Rican state was not on board with the process at that time. And then the moment came when the tourism sector was on board, and then the Ministry for Tourism joined, and that was very important because there's a policy in Costa Rica of sustainable tourism that protects children, and we were going to do it with or without the government, but then the government said yes, they would join, and so we set up an intersectoral partnership with the tourism ministry and companies. But if we, as a civil society organisation, didn't have the companies on board, we didn't have their effort, and we didn't have them lobbying the Costa Rican state, calling for a line of social responsibility to be established. So, social responsibility for the tourism industry. And so they lobbied the government for this, and then the government got on board. And we wouldn't have been able to achieve anything at all, or very little at least, in terms of protection, if the companies weren't present, and if they hadn't really embraced this cause and brought it forward with such vigour.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Milena. And just happy to hear how you actually practicing social dialogue already for a long time. You spoke quite extensively about the work in the tourism area. Shores is not yet here with us, so that means I get to ask you, Milena and Robert, a few more questions than I'd initially thought would be possible.
Okay.
So what I need to find out from you, what is the situation, Milena, in the agriculture sector? Are there any actions also occurring there? Just like you spoke quite extensively, what is happening in the tourism sector?
Mm-hmm. See, the agriculture.
Yes. The agricultural sector is an area where the Ministry of Labour and the Secretariat for Eradicating Child Labour has worked the most. In other words, they have done something that is very important with workers' organisations in the agricultural sector, and this is not something that we are involved in, to work on protecting children across the value chains of tourism. Now, in Costa Rica, we have agriculture that is very much in the hands of large corporations. The ministry does have a series of protocols and is looking at this industry. And they are more careful because they do have protocols for protection. Now, the issue is that there is less protection in the small-scale farming. Now, we have this problem that in the harvesting of coffee, we do have children who take part in harvesting as families. Now, so we do have a problem with inspection when it comes to the agricultural sector. We do also have differences between the agricultural and tourism sector. So what happens in tourism is that we have criminal networks, and this is because it is far more lucrative for those who are the middlemen in this, and it is much more dangerous for children involved in forced labour in this sector. But yes, there is work that is being done in the agricultural sector, and this is helped by labour inspections. We do have a lot of human rights that are violated in the agricultural sector, but that is more with migrant populations and teenagers. We have a lot of people who come here undocumented, and they work in the agricultural sector, and then they are never paid, they are unprotected, and then they go back to their home countries. So a lot of the time they do not receive state protection, and this really is a big challenge that we have in the agricultural sector, which impacts the undocumented adolescent migrant population.
Thank you so much, Milena. Now, Robert, I come back to you again. This time, just to get you understanding, how can responsible business conduct help Ugandan businesses to grow? Yes, Robert, please unmute yourself, and then you can proceed. Thank you.
Yeah, you see, in Uganda, if an SMEs want to learn how to get profit with integrity, then issues of child protection, adhering to labor standard is very important. Like, for example, in sectors like coffee, bananas, soya bean, sunflower, there are a lot of violation of children's rights. Because you find young children, school-going children, they're engaged in production of the raw materials. They're engaged in marketing of these raw materials. And then, like Milena said also, here there's also, you know, in Uganda we have free market economy. And then the government as well are not looking at this so seriously. For example, in coffee, you find young children going to pick up coffee, drying it up, selling it up, instead of going to attend to school. We look at sunflower production, it's the same story. So I think for this this intervention to be changed, for the SMEs to understand both private sector, the government, the ILO has to have a good unit of working together so that the information can reach all the SMEs, and then also engaging SMEs, business leaders, the entrepreneurs themselves. They need to be aware of the standards, the policies, the labor standard, the child protection policies. And then, like of late, we have experienced refugees coming from South Sudan, refugees coming from Democratic Republic of Congo, and there's not enough relief. So some of these refugees are coming out to the community to work for food, to work for some small upkeep, and you find their rights are being violated. Some of them are children, their parents are very old, they don't have energy, they cannot come on work. So this is cutting across, like Milena said, from Costa Rica. Here we still have similar challenges, but with the intervention of the FIO and then ILO, and then also like engaging the SMEs leaders, the entrepreneurs, because like in Uganda here, almost the economy is controlled by entrepreneurs. 90% of the economies are controlled by the entrepreneurs. So I think that's one of the areas where probably we need a lot of awareness and sensitization to the SMEs, so that they become aware, they become responsible, actually. And then they take responsibility as well on how we can protect our children and then also enforce labor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, for your insights. And I've heard a lot of things you're putting across, especially from a national level point of view. But I just want to understand from you. You spoke a lot more about the challenges, but just to understand from you, are there any good practices that we can see from the SMEs in Uganda in this area? Could you highlight some of them?
Some of the SMEs in Uganda, including my company, who are member to Federation of Uganda. So we have information, because there are a lot of training. Probably we are called for training after quarterly. So like the entrepreneur as me, and then the staff. So we have a lot of training, and then that's why we're able to identify. We're able to spot on if there's challenges of child labor. Like we have been working with the district department of child labor. We have reported to them a lot of cases. We have guided them where there's challenges within the community, where they're abusing children. So like for us, we're already empowered, and then there are very few other SMEs that are empowered, like my company, like me, who are trying to do a social business, a social impact for the community. Because we don't only look at the profit we make, but we look at the life we impacted within the community. So it's more of the social aspect of our business. So we see that the children are not abused, the children are going to school. Actually, some of the success stories from our intervention is the parents are willing to pay school fees for their children from the sales of honey. They're able to pay good medicals because they're producing enough honey they're selling to us and other diversified products. So the training should focus on red flags to look out for and what to do if there's a foul play. Like now, FEW and ILO Uganda has been doing this for most of the SMEs. And I must say there's a big thank you to FEW and ILO Uganda, because we are among the SMEs who are benefited, and then we are creating impact. We are trying to open up eyes of the people and then other SMEs. That you see, when you need to have a policy, you need to have a human resource policy when you're employing your people, new people in your company. Now we're trying to encourage my peers, my fellow entrepreneurs, to get policies. I've referred a lot of them to FEW and ILO, so they need to get these documents. They read, maybe even they can simplify to their level, so that okay, at national level maybe it's a different thing, but as an SMEs, we need to be flexible. We need to bring it down to the kind of people we are working with, so that we can simplify these documents, these policies, so that slowly we will be there one day, so that we respect the human rights, we don't violate the children's rights, and then no enforced labor. The other thing is there are some labor best practices, like collaborating with the peers across the sectors and industry to benchmark practices and then best practices. Get a better understanding of modern slavery risks that are inherent in your business or supply chain, to investigate risk and develop initiatives to drive forward industry-wide or sectoral change. So this is why we're saying, like, the FEW is training us, the ILO Uganda, to be open-minded as entrepreneurs, so that we're able to to get where there's a gap, and then we fill it up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now I want to bring Milena in to the discussion again. So Milena, my question to you is a very short one. It's we have a question on the issue of employment opportunities for survivors of trafficking. What are your thoughts on this? Can you give us some insight? Your organization has, of course, extensive experience. Thank you. Milena, just to request you again to unmute. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. My organization works mainly with prevention and response, but if there is in our country a system in the Ministry of Women for protection of the women and girls that are victims of sexual exploitation and trafficking. We also have a system for denouncing these practices, and this is written in our legislation, and this provides protection to victims, and it also ensures that the perpetrators are charged. But unfortunately, there are very few people that do denounce, and that is because there is a lack of trust. There is also this perception that forced labor, trafficking are mechanisms which do actually generate income where there are no income opportunities or employment opportunities. So currently, Costa Rica is reviewing its legislation so that we can ensure that we have a better mechanism for enforcing what we already have in our legislation, and also to ensure that we have a policy for the reparations that can be given to victims. But this is a system that is currently under construction. Right now, we are taking part in this process. I think it is important to outline that within the context of the pandemic, tourism has been seriously impacted in the country. Lots of SMEs which we have been working with that have been part of this wonderful mechanism and the work that has been done with the Ministry of Tourism have actually closed down temporarily, and some of them have closed down for good. And now we are seeing that there is a real problem in this sector. So as a country, we are preparing ourselves, and we are working as well as an organization so that we can see how we can ensure that children are protected above all. And this has to be done within the context of rebuilding and revitalizing the sector. So what we want is to ensure that everything that is done to ensure that there is recovery in the tourism sector is done together with another point of view. So we are not only looking at economic recovery. We want to ensure that at the heart of all of this is protecting children. So that means protecting children from forced labor or trafficking. We have a warning system to say that because of economic challenges, we must ensure that forced labor, trafficking, and so on and so forth does not worsen just because they become the only way that people can earn a living. So we want to ensure that one of the main points of our recovery in the sector is protecting children, and that is why we are working with our SMEs, and we are also working with our workers' organizations in the country.
Thank you so much, Milena. I'm really impressed with the good work that you're doing. Thank you so much for that. Just to speak a bit, we haven't spoken much about the role of government in all these processes, but the government has been doing quite a lot, especially us here in Uganda. And one of the highest commitment that I see from the governments is committing to be pathfinder countries. And your country, Milena, but also us here in Uganda, and sure as will join us, by making these global commitments. I think the governments are really saying we need to put this to an end. We need to say no to these issues of child labor, but also issues of forced labor. Until recently in Uganda, we didn't even, for instance, have a labor migration policy. But that has now changed. The government has put in place a policy framework. We are also very accommodative of refugees. Actually, Uganda is one of the best in terms of hosting refugees, because situations of conflict tend to force people out of their home, and they're vulnerable a lot. I liked what you said, Milena, vulnerability, which is linked to inequality. I was just looking at my notes. Inequality equals vulnerability, and vulnerability brings you closer to either child or forced labor. So addressing those inequalities are important. It's something which is being done here as well. An area where I've seen also a lot of improvement is in the area of inspection. In the past, that was a bit of a challenge, labor administration handling the issue of inspection, but that has changed a lot. But I would like to hear a bit from Robert, if there's anything he sees the government doing which is actually helping them, the SMEs. But before Robert comes, I'm so delighted now. I have Shores with us now. Good you have managed to join us. Understand the difficulties of clashing times, and SMEs, of course, are a jack of all trades. They do literally everything. So welcome, Shores. But just before I ask you to introduce yourself formally, I would just ask Robert if he has anything to add. Just in a minute or less. Robert?
Likewise, the government, I think, is doing quite a lot, and few as an apex body of the government arm, they're doing a lot. There's Ministry of Children and Youth Affairs. They're trying to see how the SMEs can be empowered. The government interventions to see that child labor is enforced. It's being done under the ministry. But there's also Association for Women Entrepreneurs in Uganda. And the government is giving a lot of capacity building, a lot of empowerment to both children to know their rights. Okay? But Uganda, as being an agricultural nation, about 70% of the population in Uganda are agriculturists. So what do I mean? Issues of poverty and economic challenges are much then, because across the country, the up countries, all are farmers, all are agriculturists, and that's where there are a lot of challenges for children rights abuse and forced labor, because there's production, and then this production earns an income for the families, and then the families must work for it. The parents, the mothers, the fathers, they cannot work alone. So this is where the children's rights are violated. They're engaged into production of the raw materials, probably marketing, like I said before. But the government is trying their best, as Uganda government, even in the Ministry of Tourism. There are a lot of policies in place, and a few Federation of Uganda, they're working hard to see that it's implemented. And their membership has a huge sectors from oil, agriculture, tourism, entrepreneurship. So I think the government is trying their best. But to see like government intervention with a lot of responsibilities and issues of COVID and all that has affected.
Sure.
Refugees.
Thank you.
Uganda is actually refugees, yeah.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. Now, sure is over. I want to come to you now. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you wear quite a number of hats. You're an SME owner yourself, and of course, you play a very important role on the Sri Lanka Export Board. I'll ask you to tell us about yourself, but even as you tell us about yourself, then I would also ask you to launch straight into telling us the challenges, some of the challenges linked to forced labor and human trafficking in Sri Lanka. And then, of course, how can we incentivize the SMEs to get involved in addressing forced labor? Because this is not their core business, of course. And then what policy frameworks might be helpful? I've loaded quite a number of questions in one, but hopefully, sure as you have got me, and you will be able to respond. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, I suppose, to you all. And it's almost 7:30 here, and I had to cut short a meeting with our president, who kept me for 4 hours today. And I didn't expect that. I thought I was happy he called me early, thinking he would let me go in 2 hours, but he's still going on with the meeting, and I excused myself because I think I needed a break, actually. So I'm happy to join you now. I haven't heard the previous speakers, so I hope I can stay in context with the conversation. And I am an entrepreneur and studied in the US as an agricultural engineer and came to Sri Lanka to do farming. And but that was not possible at the time I came, and I got into export manufacturing because employment was a big issue at that time. And from the beginning, I started in a post-conflict area in Sri Lanka and got involved in youth empowerment at the beginning. This was 30 years ago. And after that, kind of started realizing that SME empowerment was the need of the day. And to put it in context, lots have changed in 30 years since the post-conflict day to now. And I will run through a couple of initiatives that were taken by the private sector to empower SMEs. Now, the SME sector itself is vast and diverse. So, and you know, it could be a small farmer or a small fisherman having a small boutique. Or it could be a hotelier, who has 5 exotic rooms in a fancy hotel. So he also, so this classification of SMEs is always a challenge because it's difficult to speak about SME. I've always had a difficult time because of this classification, because sometimes the SMEs that we talk about in rural areas who are farmers are so different from somebody involved in tourism and so on, and so forth. So the context is so different. And maybe there needs to be some sort of classification in between. Anyhow, the two main issues here is for SMEs, I see, is the formal and informal SME. We are struggling with the informal SME, and it's improving slowly. And when I first set up a factory in a rural area, which was 200 kilometers from the city, in a post-conflict area, I realized how disconnected our country was. Even 200 kilometers used to take me 6 to 7 hours to get there, and today it takes only 2 hours. So at the time, the whole country, we had an ethnic conflict or a terrorist conflict, and it had a lot to do with this distance from the city, and rural empowerment was the issue. So one of the things that we realized earlier was there was hardly any institutional capacity in the regions, in the rural areas for empowerment, and even international NGOs who came to help us found it quite difficult because they had to work with individual people rather than working with institutions. And so 30 years ago, we formed the first district-level chamber of commerce in the district that I was working in. And, in the city, we had one of the oldest chambers of commerce in the world, which was 150 years old. But for 150 years, nobody saw the necessity to set up a chamber of commerce in the rural area. So this was somewhat revolutionary, I think, because today we have over 30 district-level chambers of commerce. We have women's chambers, we have different associations, sectoral associations, sectoral chambers. So this institutional capacity building has been very important in formalizing the informal sector. And I believe when it comes to forced labor and unethical business practices, this informality is a root cause. And I feel very strongly that formalizing the informal SME is a key to reducing forced labor and other irresponsible business practices. So with this, we did many programs to build awareness, and on one side we continue to advise the government on policies and things the government needs to do to make things easier for SMEs to be formal. Now, in our context, these regulatory barriers and taxation, things like that are disincentives for SMEs to formalize. And so they want to stay below the radar. They do not, we have a very good social security system for labor and so on. But when you're an informal sector business person, you are not going to adhere to those labor practices, and you end up exploiting your labor, and the labor does not have safety net, if you will, or any social support. And these things, of course, come up a lot during disasters like we are going through now during the pandemic. We are starting to realize how serious it can be. And because, the government gives stimulus packages and things like that, loan moratoriums and low interest loans and things like that to the SMEs. However, more than half the SMEs cannot benefit from it because they are informal and they don't even maintain a bank account. So I think I have taken this opportunity of the pandemic to highlight again the importance of formal business practices, people registering, and the best incentive for a government is to help SMEs, the informal SMEs create big issues, not only with labor, but also in marketplaces, because they do not pay taxes, and so they undercut the formal SME. The formal SME has to, pay 20% taxes, and it has a hard time competing with the informal SME. So this simple, that's one of the examples, serious issues, because, for instance, an informal guy could run his, hotel, guest house maybe and give it for $10, and whereas the formal SME hotelier has to pay $30 or whatever,
Sure.
He has to pay the labor taxes, and all that kind of.
I know the issues are a lot. I just want to cut it short. We are sort of running out of time already. I want to bring the rest of the participants into this conversation. But before I do that, thank you so much, really, Shores. You addressed a very important factor, the one you bring towards the end, the formalization of the informal sector is really a major issue of concern. But what I want to ask each one of you, the panelists, before I turn to dear participants today, is what is your key tip for engaging SMEs on the eradication of forced labor? And Milena, you have been a little quiet, so I will start from you that side. Just one tip in a minute, because we're really short of that. Milena, I'm requesting again. The mic keeps refusing to unmute.
Again, I'm sorry. Lo siento.
No problem.
For us, the key thing is proposing them a process. So to get them on board in a strategy of change, that is, changing the circumstances that make boys, girls and adolescents vulnerable to forced labour. So we work with companies, and then they support us in turn by proposing changes to the law, and then we campaign for that. And so working, for example, with taxi driver associations, and put the poster, that document that I showed you, in there in the taxi so tourists can see it, and so that the taxi drivers can tell tourists, if I don't do things like this, they're going to take me to prison, I'll be in trouble for it. And so it's all part of a strategy. Two things. One, have leaders in the sector, so in SMEs, in chambers of commerce, And 2, thinking up a strategy. And I'm sorry, Milena's connection seems to have dropped. The interpreters can't hear her. Oh, and she's back. So companies need a guide about what we expect from them on how to hire people. So we carry out campaigns in the community. We also request the state to change the law, and all of this is part of a whole, if you like, and key to success. So making the process inclusive and having leaders in companies. Thank you.
Thank you. I see your energy levels are quite high. It's a subject matter you're passionate about, but we have to move on now. So, Sheris, over to you. Just 1 or 2 key tips for engaging SMEs in the eradication of forced labor.
Yes, Opio. One definitely is what I spoke about earlier, I think, is giving incentives to formalize, and we have to come up with innovative incentives for them to formalize, and then we hope that they will adhere to better labor practices and so on. The other, of course, is education. You know, obviously in rural areas, people are not aware of many things. And, you know, I have found that through this institutional capacity building, and this was private sector institutional capacity building, you know, we found it much easier to educate and build awareness among the SMEs, and strengthening those, you know, like the chambers of commerce and all, I think is a significant way to empower SMEs and to make them formal. So that would be the institutional capacity building in the rural areas is one way, I think, also.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. You talked about the district level chambers. How could we possibly bring them on board in that regard? And how could we reach the informal sector with the information on eradication of forced labor? Just maybe those 2. Sorry, now I'm choosing for you the tips, but I think I like those points very much. The district level chambers, but also how can we get the information to the informal sector?
Yes, I'm also involved in the the Federation of Chambers of Commerce, which is a group. You know, it's a membership of companies and chambers that have come together for labor. And it is our employers' federation, we call it. And we continuously have, you know, currently we have webinars, we have information exchanges, we have a hotline where the chambers can reach the center. You know, all the resources are still very much in the urban areas or mostly in the city. So, access to that information is becoming easier and easier now through the video conferencing technology and so on. And I think we need to use this type of thing more and more, because that proximity to the city is an issue for formalization and so on. And if we can provide services and awareness through inexpensive means like video conferencing, I think, I mean, that's something I'm doing now with the Export Development Board as well, is to have video conferencing from the center to the district level chambers. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Robert, now I come to you. What tip can you give how we can engage the SMEs in the eradication of forced labor?
Yeah, I think
also tips, yes.
I think SMEs should take responsibility and then seek information. That's one. And then they should empower themselves to drive change forward. Ensure they have the resources they need, e.g. people, time, information, and training. And then they need to, the government need to encourage them to raise awareness and show why this matters. Probably at SMEs level, they need to appoint champions or mentors across the business who can educate, respond to problem, and tackle child negligence and workers' issues or concern. And finally, when SMEs are engaged in eradicating child labor and then enforced labor, I know this will create better employer, better community, good relationship between employer and employee and the general community, and engaging SMEs leaders to address this forced labor, probably by organizing a meeting. I request that ILO and then FEW in Uganda organize a meeting guided by a background paper, forced labor, critical issues for SMEs, business leaders in Uganda, so that, there can be a discussion, a meeting, and then see how we can forge way forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Now, I just want to take advantage of Q&A. Just want to pick some questions for you. The first, I want to put it across to Milena. You spoke about this a bit, but maybe somebody wants a lot more information. What is the situation of agriculture sector in Costa Rica? Have you any actions in this sector? You spoke about this, but maybe somebody wants just a bit more information.
Sí, agriculture is always la agricultura es siempre un.
Yes, agriculture is always a challenge. We have a lot of work being done by trade unions who closely monitor labour relations with those large companies that are working in the agricultural sector. And we also have oversight and monitoring accompanied by the Ministry for Labour and Social Security. When it comes to child labour, these large companies aren't involved very much because actually they're subject to a lot of oversight. That's internal and international oversight. There's some international oversight there, but the most significant challenge that we face, and this is something that we've always faced and that we're working on with labour inspectors, is the work of illegal adolescent migrants who of course aren't registered and are in situations of forced labour or being exploited, especially in border areas working on growing crops. And so they'll enter from the north, come in and work, and then go back to their countries. And so this is something that is an issue and the state is trying to fight, but there's a lot of work to be done. This is a pending task. Costa Rica is actually one of the pathfinders, a pathfinder country, and a commitment rather has been made, and we're actually mapping out all of the areas where this is a problem. So some really significant work has been engaged in, and since the pandemic we've been looking to get satisfied for the eradication of child labour, but this is something that's actually emerging again now due to unemployment and issues in families.
Thank you so much, Milena. Sorry, I've just seen you type your response, but that was the question I was actually putting across to you. Yeah, maybe you can just add on the comment you have already put across. Thank you.
Yeah, I just got that from the internet, and I haven't been involved in it, so I should not pretend that I know all this. But I just found out that the government of Sri Lanka has made this pre-departure training and so on compulsory. One of the things also that has come up recently is insurance policies for migrant workers and things like that, and a new labor migration policy has been developed, and principles of good governance, protection and empowerment for migrant workers and their families, and linkage of migration and development processes. So this is all, it's a continuous process. We see few initiatives in the private sector as well as from government as a result of this type of government initiative. So we have a fairly responsible labor policy in Sri Lanka. So I would keep it at that here.
Thank you so much. Now I come to you, my own Robert. Robert, somebody is asking in terms of the role of the government in the elimination of child labor. You spoke a bit about it. Are you working with the government in this space?
Yeah, actually, like on SMEs, we have rules of operation, because when you register with the government and you get the permit to work as a company, there are rules that you need to apply to. Like, for example, employment opportunity should be for people above 18 years old in Uganda. And there are policies that the government has said that the private sector, the SMEs must adhere to. Two, the government is organizing a lot of entrepreneurship trainings through different sectors. Private sector foundation Uganda, for example, there are a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs, a lot of trainings. Enterprise Uganda, Federation of Uganda Employers, there are a lot of opportunities that through the government is working with through these sectors to make sure they reach entrepreneurs. So personally, and as an SME, seeking information, seeking a network for possible information is very important. And getting documents, policies, documents, so that you know what exactly the government expects of you, and then what you expect from the government is there. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Milena, just to bring you on one more time, regarding the question of marketable skills, you spoke a bit about that. Somebody is raising the question: how can we ensure that the skills level are marketable or are at the right level?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I did not catch. There was some sound.
Sorry about that. The question is: how can we ensure that the skills programs that we are delivering offers training at a marketable level? Because that's being raised as one of the challenges that is encountered while employing the survivors, for instance, in this case of sexual exploitation, for instance.
Sí, hay toda una propuesta de desarrollo.
There's a whole development proposal for the development of cross-cutting skills that are also key skills, personal, social, production skills that are worked on with victims so that they can become integrated and look for work. Unemployment is very high in my country. It was already high before the pandemic, and now it's even worse. But we're looking for the areas where there's economic growth to guide them there. And there's a programme, a strategy inside the Ministry of Labour geared towards women specifically in order to promote women's entrepreneurship and linking them to the market. And so that's something that's being worked on and something that's being developed, so we can develop affirmative actions. Two areas are important for that. First of all, working with victims to ensure that they're supported economically and trained in activities that have been identified as good potential. So that's the first one. Then the second one is the preventive approach, the prevention of exploitation, and so that work involves supporting teenagers and mothers that have children under the age of 3 with a programme that protects the well-being of mothers and therefore the children, and involves them in a process that provides them education and work. And so protecting mothers and children who are at risk of sexual exploitation, and then the other one, recovery and redress for the victims of trafficking in particular, and training them for the market in the areas that have been identified as good potential. And so these are areas that are being worked in, and strategies are being designed not just with SMEs but also with large companies who are helping us in developing the curriculum.
Thank you so much. Just to request you, Milena, to respond to a question on the chat. I will not allow you to now explain, but just to use the chat box on the side just to type your response. I would like now to move ahead, and then just before we close, I would like to invite Laura Green. Laura Green is the coordinator for the ILO Global Business Network on forced labor. Already there was talk about certain resources, some of the work that we are doing. Laura will be able to highlight some of those. But of course, also to tell us a bit about your role, Laura, at ILO, and where we can find more information, basically, or some tools and resources. Laura, over to you. Now I give you a very short time. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas, and no problem on the short time. I'm just going to share my screen. We have a couple of resources to highlight for you, and the idea is just to make you aware that these exist, and we'll definitely be sharing them in the online discussion, and that my colleagues have also shared a couple of them already in the chat. So firstly, are there resources around how can we engage SMEs? So I think this is a question we've dealt with quite a bit today, but delving into how should we be adapting our dialogue, what are some of the key steps that they can take, and also, I think really hearing firsthand from SMEs, which is what we were hoping to do very much with the webinar today, to understand the challenges and how do we then adapt according to what we hear the SMEs' needs are. And then secondly, there are resources that already exist for SMEs. I'd like to point you particularly to the ILO's 11 indicators on forced labor. It's a concrete way of looking at forced labor, giving you some key things to look out for. We also have an app on eliminating and preventing forced labor called Checkpoints, and that's again something very practical that can guide you in terms of information. And there are a couple of guidance documents out there with case studies, particularly one produced by the ILO and the IOE together. There's also, I'd like to highlight in particular the interactive map for business of human trafficking organizations. It's at modernslaverymap.org, and this is a great place for all businesses to go to look for partners to work with, and to find people who you can share information with as well. And finally, we have a couple of more country-specific information. You can find this on the Business Network's website. We'll be sharing that in the online discussion and also in the chat. And please reach out to us if you want more information too. And just to get engaged, look at the resources section, sign up for Alliance 8.7 for the ILO Global Business Network on forced labor, and also follow us on social media. We really try as far as possible to share information targeted for SMEs and for those who are working with them. So thank you, Douglas. Thank you to our speakers today, and I'll leave it to you to close, Douglas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I've been in a very privileged position today. I've had excellent support from you, Laura, but also working with Mariska. We have been busy behind the scenes, exchanging notes and engaging even in advance. Alison from Alliance 8.7, we are so happy that you are able to join us. Excellent panelists. I couldn't allow you to speak everything. I could see passion running in your veins. You wanted to put a lot across, but we had a limited time. Our participants, I enjoyed the engagement on the side chat, even when we didn't have a lot of questions coming up, but we had a lot of engagement, resource sharing on the site. And for me, just to summarize, just 3 key takeaways. The first one that I really see coming quite clearly is the question of awareness, the question of education. And secondly, the issue of social dialogue, the engagement of the various stakeholders, critical to this process. And then, of course, a clear strategy for change. I borrowed that from you, Milena. I think that's wonderful at a country level, but also at company level, like Robert emphasized a lot. Also, Suarez raised it with the issue of the district chambers. I think that's very important. So thank you so much to participants, and thank you, everyone. It has been such a pleasure. I feel like speaking like a DJ. You have been so good. Thank you so much. It has been a great pleasure. Have a nice evening, nice afternoon, and all the best. Keep engaged. Sign up for Alliance 8.7. Sign up to the ILO Global Business Network. All the best, and have a very good day. Goodbye to you all.